But when our son was born, a challenge that we had with him and kind of a mistake that I made, I think, was I thought breastfeeding issues with our daughter. I was able to nurse her for a year. I think actually we went to about 13 months before we weaned off. And I know what I'm doing now. And what I didn't account for was the fact that the next baby is a whole different baby. Even though I knew, got to a point where my daughter and I knew what we were doing, it's a whole different experience with the next child.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Becky Ramsdell is a Peoria, Arizona woman who is now a mom of two after going through 10 years of infertility and failed adoptions in the process of building their family. She had struggles with breastfeeding both of her babies, but was ultimately able to work through those struggles and nurse each one of them for their first year. She went back to work when each of them was 3 months old, so there was a lot of pumping and milk freezing involved. Now she loves to share her story of hope and encouragement with other moms who are facing similar challenges with establishing nursing with their babies. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, Becky. I'm so glad that you're willing to take your time and share your story. How are you today?
I'm well, Lori. Thank you. And thank you for having me. This is a topic that I think is so important, and I'm always excited to talk with other moms about it and encourage them as they work on breastfeeding.
You are welcome, and I would just like to tell the audience that you live locally and that we did work together for both of your cutie pies, right?
Yes, we did. And, honestly, I don't think that I would have been able to establish a good nursing relationship with them without your help. And we'll talk about that a little bit, definitely.
Yes, well, thank you. I always say it works both ways. I can't do my part if you don't do your part. It's always nice for our audience to have a little bit of background about our guests. And so I'd like to talk about the family that you grew up in, what life was like for you.
Sure. I was born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've lived in Arizona my entire life. I grew up as an only child and had kind of an unusual family situation in that when I was a year old, my parents and I moved in with my mom's parents, so my maternal grandparents, so that my mom could help them. My parents got married a little bit later in life, and so I was not planned. My mom had me when she was 39. So, she was a bit older and my grandparents were a bit older. So that was kind of, my world. Instead of having siblings, I had grandparents around. And thankfully my grandfather passed away right before I started 6th grade and my grandmother when I began high school. So I had many years to establish that bond with them. And it was a really special thing to be able to enjoy that.
That must have been difficult for your mother. She was definitely in that sandwich generation, taking care of older people and taking care of new baby.
Yes, exactly. And now my husband and I are actually in kind of a similar situation because with it, as you mentioned, it took us many years to have our kids. So we're kind of at an age where we've got toddlers and we're still dealing with diapers, and most of our friends have kids who are in high school and, preparing to go off to college and stuff.
So were you able to maintain those relationships, or did some of them go by the wayside when your peers started having babies and you weren't?
There was definitely a challenge there because we were at such different places in our lives and because of all of the pain of dealing with infertility, and we had 6 miscarriages before we had our daughter. But at the same time, we bonded with other couples who were going through similar types of challenges. And honestly, too, now that we have our kids, I found a lot of opportunity to bond with other moms who are going through trying to figure out breastfeeding and this young baby stage and stuff. So I think you kind of, meet people where you're at in life.
Yeah, you had a long time of trying to conceive and a lot of issues along the way. So I'm always in awe of moms like you because I was really one of those women that I just really didn't even think much of it when I planned on becoming pregnant. I shortly became pregnant with each of the three. And it wasn't until after I had my first and was in some moms groups that I was exposed to other women who were having infertility issues. And before that, my whole life and my peers was about, well, how can we try and avoid getting pregnant? Yeah. And then I met, some women. So it really helped me as far as understanding and empathy to be in moms groups, listening to the heartache that mothers like you went through in order to conceive and keep pregnancies. I just absolutely had no idea what your lives were like.
For some women, it is a challenge. And I think thankfully we're in a day and age where people are talking about that more now. It's not quite as hidden. And that's another thing that I'm always open to talking with other women about, because I don't want anyone to feel like they are alone in going through that process. But I have to say, one thing that really kind of surprised me that I didn't expect after we had our daughter, who was our first child, as we worked through these breastfeeding issues and got to, a good place with it where you helped us out, we were able to establish a good latch and kind of wean off of the formula that the pediatrician in the hospital had put us on because of how much weight she was losing. Once I got to the point of being able to successfully breastfeed and stuff, I didn't expect it to be such a healing experience, but it really was. There was so much frustration I think I had with my body for all of the infertility struggles we'd gone through and the miscarriages, the babies that we had lost. And then I remember being so excited. Finally, my body was working in a way that it was designed to, and it was supposed to, and it was feeding my baby. And so that actually became a really healing experience, which I didn't expect going into it.
Yes, and I hear many mothers express the same thing, whether it was years of infertility, miscarriages, whether it was a birth trauma, the birth didn't go the way they wanted and felt like their body failed them, that in a way that they just did not expect, for being able to breastfeed their baby now became so primary and so important and so much of a validation that, like you said, that their body was working the way that it was designed to. And sometimes when you then have struggles with that, that's another difficult hurdle. And some moms can get past that. And some moms are like, this is the last straw. I just don't know if I could do this because my body has failed me so often. And when you're postpartum, you're looking at things from a very different lens because of how you're feeling. And so maybe the strength you have to get through all of the issues with conception, now that you're postpartum and you bring all the hormones to it and everything your body's been through, sometimes it's just way too much for mothers, and other times moms are able to persevere. And I think you could probably speak to this, but a large part of it has to do with not only you and how you're feeling, but to the support that you have. And when I met your husband the first go around, I just knew that you would be okay because he was there, he was interested, he stayed, he listened, and he was extremely supportive. And that is huge for moms.
That's definitely one of the keys. But I do also want to say, I think a big part of it, in addition to having that support, is it's not just the fortitude and persistence, but I think what the biggest key was for me really was going into it having very realistic expectations. I was not surprised at all that it was going to be difficult. I kind of expected it to be a challenge. And so I think that helped me because I didn't really have this picture in my head of I'll just put the baby to my breast and everything will magically work. And the reason for that actually was because when I was in my early 20s, I had a friend who I met through work who I really looked up to, who was about 10 years older than me. When she had her first baby, she wanted to breastfeed and she tried and she had a lot of difficulties and it was painful for her. She wasn't getting a good latch. The baby was losing weight and she really tried and she struggled with it. And she also very graciously acknowledged to herself that the most important thing was that, her baby be fed and grow and stuff. So at the same time, she also didn't beat herself up about it not working. And she was somebody, like I said, who I really looked up to and admired. Certainly, smarter than me, just very, she was very put together and everything. So I kind of knew going into it that, hey, if this person who, I admire so much and is, such a great person struggled with this, I shouldn't necessarily expect it to just automatically come easy to me. And I also, more closely to the time that I had my daughter, watched other friends go through the process and also struggle with it. So I kind of had this expectation that this may not be easy. And it's not just me, it's not me doing something wrong. It's just a tough thing and you need help with it. So I think that helped a lot.
Well, that certainly did. I would have to say that based on all my years of experience, that you are in a minority, because most of us expect it to go easy. Even when we hear certain rumblings from people, we hear the stories and we see our friends. I think many of us, we just kind of like the birth, we just think we're going to be different. We don't think we're going to be that person who has that emergency traumatic cesarean section. We're going to have that nice vaginal birth where everything goes pretty well. And I think the same thing with breastfeeding. So you were intensely observant of your friends and peers, and you took that in, and you probably have you're very optimistic, but you also have a realistic part of your personality that I think helped you with that.
I do like to think of myself as optimistic, but actually that kind of makes me laugh that you said that, because I don't want to give the picture that it was easy for me to deal with the fact that we were having challenges, because it absolutely wasn't. I was dealing with all of the hormones that hormonal changes that occur when you've just had a baby. And I had to have C-sections for both of mine. My daughter, I had a minor placental abruption. And so we kind of knew that I might need to have a C-section. But once the signs of that occurred, we had to do, an unscheduled one. So I was recovering from that surgery as well and dealing with the hormone in the hospital. My daughter lost more than 10% of her body weight. So we were working with an on-call pediatrician because we delivered at a place that was a hospital that our pediatrician was not on staff with. And this pediatrician said, at this point, 10% kind of triggers the requirement to go on supplemental formula. So I was watching my daughter being fed by my husband instead of me. And she got to the point quickly where she was associating him with her milk instead of me. And that was hard to experience. So I don't know if you remember, but when I first contacted you, I found your website and I called your number and you answered the phone. And all I could do was just sob into the phone. I couldn't even speak. So I had to hang up and then send you an email and say, I'm the crazy lady who just called you crying and I need help. So we set up the appointment through email instead of on the phone. So I don't want to give the impression that it was an easy thing, but I do think it helped me to know that others had struggled with it. And that didn't just mean that there was something else inherently wrong with me.
I think that I appreciate you expanding on that. And we're going to go into more detail because that might have given someone the impression that was so, that because you expected it to be easy, expected some difficulty, that you were just okay with it being difficult. So I think that having that realization or that reality check that it might be is helpful for just being open-minded to what happens when everything unfolds. I kind of giggled when you said about the phone call. So I cannot tell a lie. I don't remember exactly that phone call. However, I will tell you that a few years ago when my husband started to work from home and he would overhear like my side of the conversation and he would say, after a while, after a few months, one day at dinner, he said, I don't know too many people who answer a business line and like less than 1 minute into the conversation start saying, it's okay. You can just breathe. I'll wait for you. Just calm down. Just take a breath in. He's like, you're supposed to be talking to a mom and scheduling an appointment. And then you're going through this breathing exercise with her. He's like, it's the weirdest thing. He just didn't quite understand it. But after a while he did. We talk about it from time to time now. He only hears my side of the conversation, but he has commented on that. And I said to him, because it's like when I call my mother sometimes and I'm really upset about something and I try to hold it in and all she has to do is say, oh, hi, how you doing? And then I'm like a bundle of tears if something's really going on, right? So you get that person on the other end of the line. And if they sound even just a little bit empathetic,
Exactly.
you are just letting loose. And the postpartum crying and tears, it's like heaving, right? It's not just little baby crying, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, know that you were not alone. I wasn't surprised. I didn't think you were crazy. I thought here's another mom who was just like me when I was there and who's just like all the other moms that I speak to. Here's a mom that's normal. That's what I think. I'd like for you to tell us just a little bit about when you were younger. What is it that you thought that you would be doing when you grew up, and how does that compare to what you're doing now? So I just want to hear a little bit about the Becky Ramsdell now before we get into the Becky Ramsdell mom with kids.
I think I knew some reason fairly early on, about third grade, what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. So that was always my focus. And I worked toward that, even in working on the student paper in elementary school and junior high school, and then also in high school. And my bachelor's degree is in print journalism. And that is actually where I started my career. But the thing about a job like that, and when I graduated from college and started my career, that was just as the internet was starting to get established. It was nothing like it is now. And even back then, to truly be a great journalist, it was kind of a 24/7, 365 kind of commitment to your time and your energy. And so I quickly realized that even though I really enjoyed the newsroom and kind of, finding out what was going on in the world and sharing that with people, it didn't allow for as much balance as I needed and wanted in my life. So I wound up transitioning over to the kind of the marketing and public relations side of things, and now have ultimately transitioned into a job where I work full time on the internet and I do digital analytics. It's pretty fun because I still get to be involved in communication. And the internet really is a combination of all forms of communication, written communication, audio like we're doing here, and video, as well as a whole interactive element to it. So I do digital analysis, and I've also always really enjoyed math. So it kind of allows me to combine everything that I enjoy doing, but it's also a job that didn't even exist when I graduated. So definitely wasn't a job that I saw myself doing when I was growing up, but it also allows for more balance and flexibility in my life.
Yeah, like who could have thought all those years ago that your full-time gig would be working in front of a computer all day?
Exactly.
And the kind of work that you do. It's a pretty amazing world that we live in. Even when I was pregnant with my first, it's just not a world that I ever thought possible. And it was rare, very, very rare for anybody to work from home in those days. And then I remember one job where we had a computer and it was like one computer for like 25 people. And, of course,
right.
that has evolved. We're dating ourselves, right, Becky?
Exactly.
All right. So I'd love to ask you a question. I'd like to get to breastfeeding. And I don't know if you've ever had the conversation with your mother. Have you ever asked her, or do you know if you were breastfed?
We have talked about this, and I was not breastfed. I was strictly formula fed. And my mom likes to tell the story about how I would go through 10 bottles of milk in a day. I really enjoyed being formula fed, apparently. And honestly, that was kind of another thing I think that made me realize that ultimately, even if I had struggles with breastfeeding and I wasn't able to overcome them, that I would be okay because I did well in school. I have been relatively healthy my entire life and stuff aside from, some of the infertility challenges that we've faced. I knew that even though I really, really wanted to breastfeed, first and foremost, for the benefits that, we've heard so much about in recent years that it gives to babies, but also we've heard about the benefits that it gives to the mom as well. So, I knew it was important for me to try to do that, even though that hadn't been what my situation was with my mom when I was a baby. But I also knew that ultimately, you can still have a happy, healthy, successful baby growing up into an adult, even if that doesn't work out the way that you want it to.
And your mom, what was she like when you were, like, let's say with your first baby, your daughter, when you were breastfeeding and having struggles? Was she supportive of you?
And that's another interesting thing I should mention because life has evolved. My mom actually moved in with us about 10 years ago. So she has lived with us this whole time that we've had our kids. So she's been there day in and day out to see it. She had a lot of, I think, mixed feelings about it. I think she felt like because I was choosing to do that and I was choosing to take an approach that was different than the one that she had taken with me, I think she took it, especially at first, took it a little bit personally that I was perhaps saying that her choice was not the right choice and stuff. And that's not, what I was communicating at all with my own decision about how to try to feed my children. So, I think she felt a little bit honestly hurt by it and like she was being criticized by it. She was also very curious about it. And I think, and I was born in 1974, and these things perhaps weren't talked about so much back then. So as a little time passed and she was watching me do that and stuff, she had questions about it. And she asked me about it, even, asked me, how does it work and what does it feel like? Over time, she, I think came to be accepting of it. And then one thing that I remember from about 2 years ago that was really cool was my son was just about 4 months old at that point, and my daughter was just over 2.5. And so my daughter was used to seeing me nurse my son all the time. And one time, my daughter was sitting on the couch in my mom's area of the house in our living room, and we looked over at her. She had one of her dolls. She had pulled the collar of her shirt down and had one of her dolls up to her chest. And I looked over at her and asked her what she was doing. And she said, I'm feeding my baby. That was the most cool thing that she just knew that, that was how mommy feeds the baby. And she was doing that. And my mom was really, she thought that was neat too. She kind of recognized, that relationship and that she wanted to do it too.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It was the cutest thing. So, and I was really excited to think that that even from this early age, she's getting that exposure to the idea of it. And hopefully, that will carry through for her. And if she has children one day that, that she'll be able to experience that. Honestly, I have to say the flip side of that was right around the same time that happened. Actually, maybe a month or two before, because Zach was only about 2 months old. We went to a museum here in town. They were having a Lego exhibit, and we thought our daughter might enjoy that. And we also took our 10-year-old godson with us. So we were at the museum enjoying the exhibit. It was time for my son to nurse. And so I told my husband, I'm going to take him and, go find a private place that I can do that. And I have to say, while I'm totally supportive of moms who, are completely comfortable fully exposing their breast while they're nursing in public, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all, I'm not as comfortable being quite that exposed. So I tend to use a nursing cover, and I have one that has basically is like an apron. It goes around your neck so it can't just slide off of you. And so I went and found a bench right outside the women's restroom at this museum. And it was kind of, down a hallway away from the exhibits. There wasn't a ton of traffic. So I've got this nursing cover on and I've got my son under it. And literally the only thing you can see of him are his tiny little feet sticking out. The rest of him is under the cover. You can't really even see his legs or anything. And there was a woman whose 10, 11-year-old daughter maybe needed to go to the restroom. And so her daughter walked by us and went into the restroom. And then and I didn't think anything about it. And a few minutes later, her daughter came out. And as she was walking back past us again toward her mom, she had her hand up like over her eye to like shield so that she wasn't able to see me. And she was saying to her mom, "I'm not looking, I'm not looking." And I didn't even realize at first what that meant. And it took me a few seconds to process it. And by the time that I did, they were gone and stuff. But I realized her mom, I think might have told her, don't look at her. She's breastfeeding and stuff. And even though I was completely covered, this girl had gotten the message that that was wrong and shameful and it shouldn't be looked at, even though really there was nothing to see. That was kind of eye-opening to me and disappointing. And if I would have realized it first, I might have tried to say something to reassure them or whatnot. But, unfortunately, there's still kind of that attitude towards it sometimes in public.
What an interesting story that is to share. I can't wait for us to live in a world where even a mom like you doesn't have to start off saying, listen, I'm okay with everybody if they want to bare their breast. I'm just not comfortable, so I use a cover. Some moms just still feel the need to even say that because, we're kind of like afraid of a little bit of backlash, someone saying something negative about it. And I certainly know that that is not your intent. The thing is like we still live in a society where you feel like you even need to qualify it by saying that. But here you are with, like, I want every mom to be comfortable. So if she wants to use a cover and that's her comfort zone, great. If she doesn't and that's her comfort zone and she doesn't care what other people think or say, great. It's all about us having the choice to decide how we sit and feed our babies, in this case on the outside, that we shouldn't have anybody saying anything one way or the other. But the story that you previously told with your daughter growing up in a household where for her anyway, breastfeeding is the norm. And when she's playing house or playing mommy and thinking about feeding her baby, she just naturally puts her baby to the breast. And that would be a very normal thing to do. And then this child, she has a mom who thinks that there's something wrong with this now. And I think you're right on the money because if her mother stood on the outside of the restroom and just waited for her daughter to go in and come out, I don't think you would have had that kind of reaction. And so I think it's pretty obvious that her mother did say something negative to her about it, and saying something negative when, like you said, all you could see was his little legs. I mean, for all anybody knows, you just had a sleeping baby under there that you were covering from the lights, right? The assumption was correct that you were breastfeeding. The mother didn't know that for sure. And to say something to her daughter to now feel that way, and a 10 or 11-year-old girl is pretty impressionable. And unless she hears good and positive and normal on the other side of that coin, this is what she's going to be left with. Wow, what an interesting story, in both of those juxtaposed against one or the other. Have you heard that Phoenix, Arizona is blessed with an amazing birthing center? Baby Moon Inn Birth Center is the best option for families who want access to midwifery care in and out of a hospital setting. You can experience birth in a comfortable home-like setting where natural birth is the focus. Laboring in water, being able to walk outside during labor, and enjoy the beautiful garden. This is what birth can be like for you. There is so much more to learn about Baby Moon. The staff would love to have the opportunity to meet you and would like to extend an invitation for you to attend a free Choices in Childbirth class and a tour of the birth center. All you need to do is call 602-314-7755. That's 602-314-7755 and ask for the tour dates. You can also go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast. And on the right-hand side of the page, you will see a link that will bring you to the calendar and you can sign up for the tour yourself. When you come in for the tour, make sure that you tell them you found out about it from the All About Breastfeeding podcast, and you will be given a very lovely free gift. Now, back to the show. Becky, I would love for you to share a little bit story about your breastfeeding. So one of the things that you have already said is that you had the ability to be able to be close to another mom who was breastfeeding and other people, but to be able to see some of the struggles that she had. And you went into your breastfeeding experience accepting the fact that you may very well have struggles. So I'm wondering, beyond that experience of watching other women go through the process, is there anything particular that you and or your husband did to prepare for breastfeeding as far as classes that you took, videos that you watched, or books that you read?
I did very little of that. And there were a couple reasons for that. And so I hope this also encourages moms that even if I certainly would encourage them to do as much as they can in classes and reading and talking with other moms to prepare for it. But even if they don't or they can't, it is still possible to go on to, establish a nursing relationship with your child. The main reason that I didn't do anything to prepare for it, and we also didn't do anything to prepare for childbirth either, was we had lost 6 pregnancies prior to this. We were still, even when we reached the 3rd trimester, so terrified that the pregnancy would end badly that I just could not attend childbirth preparation classes sitting in a room full of other couples where they fully expected, to have a baby that they would take home from the hospital at the end of this. Because until our daughter literally, came out of my body, we did not feel confident that we were going to be taking a living baby home from the hospital. So it was frankly just too emotionally difficult to prepare. We didn't even register until she was 9 days old. And so we did very little preparation overall. I did try to read a bit about breastfeeding. I even downloaded a couple of books onto Kindle so that I read through them that way to be able to try to breastfeed. That was the one area that I felt brave enough to try to do a little bit of reading about. But then honestly, as I started reading, in some cases, I kind of felt like it's a challenge to put that knowledge into practice until you actually have a baby to try it with and stuff. So we did not do a whole lot to prepare. And then what I found was when we had our daughter and we were in the hospital, certainly every one of the nurses wanted to be supportive of our intent to breastfeed. And they all tried to help as much as they could. But one of the challenges about that was that, of course, you have a different nurse every 12 hours and stuff, and they all had a different way of doing it. Some of them would take my breast and, really latch the baby on there, and others were just trying to guide me on how to do it and to not have consistency. I had read something somewhere that had said, ask for a lactation consultant to come in when you're in the hospital. And so I asked one of the nurses if I could request a lactation consultant. And her response was, well, you're not actually having a problem with a tongue tie or, major latching difficulties or something like that. So you don't qualify because we only have one lactation consultant and we have all these rooms, and she can only work with those who have the most significant issues, and you don't really have an issue, you're just learning. We got home from the hospital on a Wednesday afternoon, and I had been producing colostrum in the hospital, but it was literally about an hour after we got home from the hospital that I started producing milk. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what it looks like when it's milk, and this is how it works. But I knew that we needed help because we were having to supplement with formula so that my daughter wouldn't continue to lose weight. And so I quickly got online and started looking for a lactation consultant. And actually, the first one that I found, she said she wasn't really doing it anymore, but she, since I had found her information online, she would be happy to try to help me if I came over to her house. And she didn't live very far away from us. So we went over there. But it was, at like 8:00 on a Friday night. And so it wasn't really a time that my daughter was super hungry, and it was at her house. So it wasn't in where I typically sat in our bed to do this and stuff. So it was somewhat helpful, but it wasn't as helpful as it could be. And it wasn't all of the help that I needed. And so that's when I wound up contacting you, because I knew that while that had worked to a degree, it didn't get us all the way to where we need to be. And so I think that's another thing I would encourage moms with is if you try something and it helps a bit, but it doesn't get you all the way to, where you're completely successfully nursing, don't just necessarily give up at that point. Reach out for help from somebody else. Try something else. It's a process. And sometimes it can take time. And I think with our daughter, it took us, she was maybe 3.5 weeks old before we were able to completely stop the supplemental formula. And we can talk about this perhaps more in a moment, but I do want to say another part of this that was key in helping stop the formula was having a pediatrician who was supportive of breastfeeding too.
Yeah, that's big. We will talk about that. There's a couple of things that you brought up that I just wanted to expand a little bit on. One of the most common complaints that I hear mothers say, and I've worked in a hospital myself, so I can totally agree and appreciate this, is the inconsistency of the information. And so I think it's great if moms take a class and learn some really good information beforehand. To me, it's about teaching parents not so much the how-to, because what I say in classes is it's really hard because you don't have your breastfeeding partner, you don't have your dancing partner to do this thing with. So the actual art of latching on is you just can't do that during a class. But there are things to learn as far as how do you know what it's supposed to feel like? How do you know when it's going well? And how do you know when you need help? So the inconsistency just drives parents insane. And of course, it's very disheartening for me to hear that you were told that you're just learning, you don't need help. We save the lactation consultant for moms who are really having bigger problems. And I know how that works. And anybody who works in any corporation or company knows that sometimes there's just not enough of you to go around. And so many IBCLCs are having difficulties in what I say that they're not able to really shine, in that they're not able to see all the moms and help them as well as they would like to, because there always seems to be in a time crunch how many patients that they can see during their short 24 or 48 hour stay. So they usually have a difficult time meeting the needs, and it's not their fault per se, it's just the system. You get the inconsistency frequently from other staff members. But the other interesting thing is that you have a baby that lost a lot of weight in a very short period of time. I don't remember if they did the weight check there, but when they, in your instance and other instances, what I find that they tell moms that you're not having any big problems, you're just learning. Well, a baby that's lost a large amount of weight is a mom that's having a problem. She is learning, but that's also a big problem because that shouldn't happen. A mom it's hurting her, she's in pain, or her baby's sleeping mostly at the breast. Those, to me, and to other IBCLCs, we're like, that's a big problem that needs to be addressed. She's not just learning, because the just learning is like, okay, you can put your baby on with a latch that's comfortable, and your baby is sucking and swallowing and doing what they're supposed to be doing. But the learning for you is you're still kind of awkward. And how do I hold the baby the best? How do I support? How do I use the pillows? that's the part of just learning that you might not need any specialized specific specialist to help you. But weight loss and pain and sleepy babies and poor output, those are all big issues, but some people don't see it as such. And so it's the inconsistency and the lack of knowledge on the part of the staff. But the other thing that you said was that you had called someone and you went to their house. And one of the beautiful things for moms is if they do come to my home office, I try and make them as comfortable as possible. And I ask them to bring the pillows, and we do our best. And for enough women, that's totally fine. And for other women, they really want and are in need for us to meet them in the place where they're at, where they're sitting breastfeeding their baby, what bed, what chair, what pillow you're using, what stool, so we can really help you get comfortable with the other part of that just learning process, which is the awkwardness of it all. And how do I sit in my own place and be comfortable as I possibly can once I actually get the baby latched on? So there's a lot of parts of your story with the classes and how it went in the hospital and how it went when you were home that is very, I think, important information for moms to really get from this conversation. And what I'd like for you to expand upon now is we already established you had great family support, but tell me a little bit about how your pediatrician played into the very, very early days of breastfeeding and your need for them to be supportive.
Our pediatrician wasn't on staff at the hospital that our babies were born at. So we had to work with an on-call pediatrician at the hospital. When we got home from the hospital, we had our first appointment with our pediatrician the next day, and we explained to him what, had happened at the hospital and how our daughter had lost weight and that we had been asked to supplement her and stuff. And he certainly was concerned about the weight loss, but also, was concerned about that then supplementing with formula can make it more challenging for the baby and stuff. So he was very encouraging of us to come into the office as often as we needed to weigh her. And, he's like, you are welcome to do that on a daily basis, because we expressed that we ultimately wanted to be able to exclusively breastfeed and not have to do formula. So he was very supportive of that. He said, we certainly want her to get to a point where she's gaining weight and you're able to get more of your breast milk into her, slowly wean off of the formula. But he's like, you can try that, weaning her off of the formula and come in and check and see how she's doing with her weight. And it's okay, even if her weight plateaus for a day or two as you guys kind of get your groove and, keep going with it. So I think it was, like I said, just the idea that he was fully supportive of us wanting to exclusively breastfeed. And he wasn't saying, oh, it's just easier to keep her on formula, just keep doing that. And he was saying, you can come in and check her weight every day, and saying, it's okay if it's not a straight trajectory in terms of her weight gain. And, we'll keep a close eye on it. He wasn't communicating this message of, you're a bad mom if she has a day or two where she's not gaining weight. So that part of it, that was very supportive, and that helped us to kind of get over that fear of no longer relying on the formula. But I have to say, any sort of relationship is kind of complex, because that was our experience with our first daughter. And our pediatrician is very supportive of us breastfeeding. But when our son was born, a challenge that we had with him, and kind of a mistake that I made, I think, was I thought breastfeeding issues with our daughter, I was able to nurse her for a year. I think actually we went to about 13 months before we weaned off. And I know what I'm doing now. And what I didn't account for was the fact that the next baby is a whole different baby. Even though I knew, got to a point where my daughter and I knew what we were doing, it's a whole different experience with the next child. And we had, our son saw 3 or 4 different pediatricians while we were in the hospital. Well, maybe 2 or 3 in the hospital with him, because there was a different pediatrician on call each day. And then we took him to our pediatrician after we were discharged from the hospital. What nobody told us was that he was tongue-tied. And so we wound up again in the same situation, struggling to try to get him to gain weight. And I had my scale at that point because, I had gotten that after working with you. So I would put him on the scale to see his weight, nurse him, take him back off after having, or put him back on the scale again after having nursed him. And sometimes there would be no difference on the scale, or there would only be a half ounce of difference. And he never gained a full ounce. Yet then I would immediately start to pump, and I would pump out 1.5 ounces from one breast and 2 to 2.5 from the other. So I was making plenty of milk, but it just wasn't getting into him. And so I think we reached about the 10-day mark, and I called you and I'm like, I need help. Please come over. I was more calm that time because I knew that we could work through the challenges. And when you came over, and the first thing you did was took him from me and looked at him, and you said, you have a situation here. He has a pretty significant tongue tie, and he's not going to be able to successfully latch until until that's addressed. And so you and I started talking about what we needed to do to get that addressed, and how there aren't very many doctors or other medical professionals here in the Valley who deal with that. The one that you recommended was out of town for about a week or so. And so I was trying to find somebody else who might be able to address it quicker. And I called my pediatrician's office and I explained the situation to him. And in that case, I was really I was surprised by his reaction, because he's like, I looked at him and he's fine and he doesn't have a tongue tie. And lactation consultants always say there's a tongue tie issue and it's just an overused excuse. And, your son is just a lazy nurser. And I knew from having had the experience with my daughter of what, nursing looked like. And I said, he's not a lazy nurser. He's really trying. And it's just not working. And he really wants that milk, but it's just not working for him. And honestly, in that case, the pediatrician and I we disagreed about it. And I said to him, I'm like, I really respect you and you know that. But at the same time, I feel like I need to, pursue getting this looked at more. And he backed off at that point. He's like, I will support whatever you want to do, but I really don't think it's an issue. So that was interesting to me, that in that way we had a difference of opinion, but it's so important to advocate for, what you think is right with your child. And so we went on to the doctor that you had recommended. We took him in, and literally it was, that was the line in the sand. Once he got that tongue tie clipped, they brought him back into the room. He was able to immediately start nursing. And from then on, we never had a nursing session where he had less than 1 ounce of difference. Up until then, we'd never had a session where he had taken in a whole ounce. And after that, he never took in less than 1 ounce. And he was, frequently 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces. So it was just a night and day difference. And I was really proud of myself for sticking to what I felt like I knew as a mother my child needed.
That's what I was going to ask you, because we as lactation consultants run into this all the time with moms going back to their pediatrician, having a conversation very similar to yours. And then moms are put in the position, well, this is just a lactation consultant who's usually not a doctor. Some physicians do become IBCLCs, but by and large are not. And so do I listen to this person who's an IBCLC, or do I listen to this person that I've hired to be my baby's pediatrician? And when they say it's overused, overdiagnosed, and as a mom, you're looking at your baby and saying, there's a part of most mothers and fathers that are saying, well, this is significant procedure and we're going to quote unquote clip the tongue, which I don't use those words, clip the tongue. I talk about frenulums and a piece of tissue under the tongue, but those kinds of words. And it's like, if you're not sure about anything and you're postpartum and you're brand new parents, it's more frequent for parents to say, well, we're just going to go by what my baby's pediatrician said. They already looked, they said the baby's not. And so I've had many conversations with pediatricians I've worked with in the hospital and et cetera. And I will also tell moms, I'm like, well, okay. And I can appreciate that, but breastfeeding is the norm. If that's not the issue, can you please ask your pediatrician to spend time with you and help you figure out what else it might be? Because babies are not lazy nursers. They're hungry and they're thirsty and they're trying to get their food. They're not lazy, they're trying. They're just not able to transfer the milk. And so I kind of put pediatricians to the fire and say, if that's not it, then you need to help this mom figure out what is wrong. Because if it was any other issue that you couldn't solve, you would be trying to help solve it. And if you couldn't, then you would send her to a specialist for any GI issues or orthopedic issues or what have you. You wouldn't just say, it's not that, but I have no way of helping you.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. Honestly, I don't know if I would have been as comfortable sticking to what I felt, my child needed if that had been my experience with my daughter, where I didn't already have a couple of years of experience under my belt. I hope I would have, and I think that's a case where, if a new mom is getting conflicting messages and they aren't sure what to do, reach out to other moms in that situation, get a second opinion from another pediatrician, another lactation consultant, but don't necessarily just immediately feel like you have to say, okay, my pediatrician said, I'm just not going to be able to nurse, and accept that if you really want to pursue it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely helps to have had another baby that you previously nursed, that you had a very good experience, and you went the long haul for, more than a few months, that you could see that transition to the difficulty early on, to becoming very comfortable with it, to it being what I call just the rhythm of part of everyday life. Like you're just not even thinking about it at all. So the convenience is you just know you get it and you enjoyed it. And now you have a second baby and, you are able to confidently say, he's not lazy. He's trying and he wants it and he's going for it. And I'm able to pump it out. He's just not able to transfer it.
Right.
And so it sounds like pretty quickly you were able to see that difference. And I know that it still took a little bit of time for him to really come to full circle to getting a full feeding, but it didn't take that long, right?
No, not very long at all. And we were able to, with him, we were more quickly able also to wean off of the formula because my body, the second time around, started producing the milk while we were still in the hospital. And like I said, after I would try to nurse him, then I was able to pump. And so he was getting more of my pumped milk earlier on. So fortunately with him, we were able to, use less formula overall and then transition to a point where I wasn't having to pump anymore because he was just able to, to completely get it directly from my breast.
Very wonderful. I would like for you to think back to, because we talked a lot about the hard times, and I also know that you had a lot of really good and fun and comfortable and enjoyable breastfeeding times. So I would like for you to first share with us, what are some of the things that you really got out of breastfeeding that was comfortable, enjoyable, pleasurable?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, really for us, I think in both cases, it was just that first month as we were working through it and figuring out, how to get into a good groove and stuff that was challenging. And then from there on out, it was pretty smooth sailing. And that, it provides you that opportunity to hold your baby close and in a way where you are having to have some skin to skin contact just from exposing your breast. Whereas I think if I had been strictly using a bottle, even using a bottle with breast milk in it, that you're more likely to just stay clothed and whatnot. So there was, it kind of automatically required a little bit more of that physical connection. I know there are a lot of moms who get very good at, walking around while nursing and holding their baby. I even have one friend who would talk about how she went grocery shopping with her toddler in tow and was literally nursing her baby as she was carrying her around the grocery store. I was never that coordinated to do something like that. So it really also, forced me to sit down and to have this time where I'm just focused purely on the baby and that connection and looking at them and getting that chance to just study their face and enjoy them and think about how hard we worked to have them and just revel in the fact that they were now here and I was getting to do this completely, totally normal mom thing with them, especially where I hadn't felt normal, like, in that sense in a long time. So it was just those, peaceful, quiet times, and also the times in the middle of the night where, I would get up to nurse them and stuff and enjoy that, quiet time in the evening where they go right back to sleep and they can sleep while they're nursing, just enjoying that feeling of being close to them.
Yeah, you said a lot of really good stuff there. I always love the middle of the night. In the beginning, it's a chore and you're sleep deprived and they're waking up and for most of us, we're like, oh no, not again. But especially if it was hard, if it was a struggle and you're recovering from the birth. But after a while, I know I actually loved the middle of the night when the house was quiet and the lights were off. You get really good at it, but you're just peaceful and doing this breastfeeding thing, and like the rest of the outside world is like there, and it's just you and your little cocoon. And so that was some of my favorite times were in the middle of the night, and oftentimes the last feeding before the evening and the first one when they woke up. That it kind of evolved to that as they got older and busier during their daytime, when they weren't just sitting so quietly and leisurely on your lap and feeding.
Yeah, exactly.
Then those middle of the night ones and early feeds were special in their own way. Well, thanks for sharing so much. I would love for you to think back to a time when it was just really, really rough. And if you're like most of us, there may have been a time or two where you just felt like, I just don't know if I could go one more feed, one more day. Did you ever reach that point?
In the beginning, I kind of struggled to have hope, especially with my daughter, until we were able to connect with you. But for me, I think where those kinds of moments came, honestly, were once I went back to work. And I have to say, I was very fortunate in that after my daughter was born, I was able to mostly start working from home. So that made it much easier for me to be able to continue to pump so that they were still getting my milk, even though we sent it to daycare in bottles. So they were getting bottles. And I have to say, I know that there's a lot of concern sometimes about if you introduce a bottle to a baby, then it's more difficult to get them to latch. My children, I would, nurse them on the breast in the morning when we got up. They'd have bottles all day at daycare. Once they got home, we were back to the breast, and, we didn't use the bottles at home. And neither one of them ever had any problem going back and forth like that. But pumping during the day, even though I was at home, and honestly, I would, frequently sit there in my t-shirt with a hands-free pumping bra on so that I could continue to work even while I was pumping. And we rented, a hospital-grade breast pump. And to make it as easy as possible, I just don't want to pump for another day. And it was really challenging. And, that was the part that I looked forward to stopping, actually nursing them. I did not want to stop doing that. I did not look forward to that in either case, but I really was looking forward to the pumping. And there were days that I just didn't want to continue doing it. Somehow, thankfully, I kept pushing through. And like I said, for my daughter, we went 13 months. With my son, we had to stop a little more abruptly. He was a little stinker when it came to biting. So we were right about at exactly 11 months. So I wound up stopping pumping a little earlier with him. But yeah, there are definitely days where you feel like that. And I think it's totally okay to feel like that. Honestly, my first year with each of them, especially once I got to the point of going back to work, I felt like all that I did for that year was nurse and work and clean bottles and get a little bit of sleep. And those 4 things were my world for that first year. Once I stopped pumping and stuff, and we weaned them off, it became a little bit easier. It's definitely a challenging first year, but it passes, and it passes quickly. And there are so many joys that occur during it as well that it was totally worth it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing the pumping difficulties and how you felt about it. Many moms feel that way. And I certainly don't want to take away anything from moms who are exclusively breastfeeding and not pumping, because you and I did that, and we're working really, really hard. I mean, once you become a mom, you take on at least one other full-time job. I think that when moms pump, though, I almost put you in another category in the way that that is like taking on another part-time job. At least it is a lot of work, and psychologically for moms to sit on the pump, and sometimes it's hurting them, not comfortable, sometimes it's not, but that is not the best part of your days, right? And it really is a chore for most mothers, and to keep up that chore with everything else that you've taken on as a new mother, I am in awe of moms who need to pump because they're separated from their baby, whether it's school or work, because it's just really hard to gear yourself up, to hook yourself up to that pump, 3 or 4 times a day that you need to in order to keep up your supply. I was just listening to someone else talk, and they were talking about being mothers and being productive, and how it's this whole work-life balance. And one of the things they said really resonated with me in thinking that if you have 3 jobs, you're already doing way too much, and to take on a 4th, something has to give. And so she gave an example. If you're a mother, that's already a huge job. If you're a homeowner, taking care of your home, cooking, cleaning, shopping, paying bills, all that stuff, that's another job. And then if you're a wife, that's another job. And if you work outside the home, that's another job. And then, in this case, if you're pumping, that's another job. So once you get past having 3 jobs, so a mother, a homeowner, and a wife, anything else after that is just more full-time work. Something has to give. And so for moms, like, I heard you say that your first year was really all about feeding your baby, washing bottles, and pumping, trying to get some sleep. There's not a whole lot more. And yet you're working also. So it's no wonder that we look back at that first year with lots of love, but also there's some of us that look back at that first year and say, kind of like our teenage years, like, I don't know if I'd want to do that again. But, we have another baby and we do it again. Right.
Right.
But it's not it's not that we look forward to the whole pumping and bottle feeding and washing thing. It's just, that's why I'm in awe of mothers, because you've decided it's important enough to you, to your life, to your baby, to take on that additional workload. And it truly is a workload. So I always appreciate when moms are doing that. And I think when they get flack from their companies and et cetera and other people, I'm like, listen, it's already hard enough for them. Leave the mothers alone and just let them do what they need to do.
Yeah. And I have to say, one thing that I learned pretty quickly once I started pumping, and my daughter was at daycare, we had, enough bottles for maybe about 2 days of daycare. And I had, one set of shields and one set of all of the parts for pumping. So I was having to wash those 4 times a day. And that quickly made, my hands pretty raw from being in the soap, the soapy water all the time and stuff. And it took time. And so pretty quickly, even though it was expensive, one of the things I found that helped me get through that was we went out and bought a little more than a week's worth of bottles. And we bought 4 sets of pumping parts so that I just had to wash them once a day at the end of the day. And the bottles, we usually tried to throw a load in midweek and then another load on the weekend in the dishwasher and stuff, and, doing the sterilizing and the different things that you need to do with them. Even though it was expensive to buy all of those, I don't know that I could have continued without having that and just making it more convenient in that way. And then the other thing that I did, because we bought the Dr. Brown bottles that have a lot of little parts to them that have to be individually washed. Sometimes there were times I would say to my husband, I'm like, can you please wash all of these parts because I need a break from it and stuff. And, he certainly helped with all of that. It was a little easier for me to do it most of the time because I was working from home. But he helped out with that too. So I think, if you're in a position to buy those extra supplies to make life a little bit easier, do it. And also don't be afraid to ask for help from somebody, whether it's, your husband or your mom or a friend or a sister or whatever, even for things like helping wash bottle parts, just whatever you need to do to get through.
Yeah. And, I'm so glad you said that because I talk to moms all the time about joining other breastfeeding mothers groups, just hanging out with other moms, because just what you said, that can save, to know that you did that and to plant those seeds for another mom can literally save her hundreds of hours by the time her whole breastfeeding relationship is over. And I have moms kind of look at me like a little wacky. And I think especially the partners sometimes, because I'm encouraging them to spend money to buy more parts. They can do what you did. And they typically don't want to because they feel like, they spent a lot of money on other things and they already have the parts. And I try to explain to them, like, in your jobs, what you want to do is, don't you want to buy the most appropriate tools in order to do your job the best and most efficient way you can? Well, your wife is pumping and she needs to have the proper tools, as many as she needs, in order to do the job as efficient as she possibly can. And sometimes when I put it that way, it's like, oh yeah, I get it. Because it seems like a lot of money, but in the end, and after a year, and especially if you have more kids, it's not that much more money. But even just you sharing that one little thing, I bet you anybody who hears that and takes that on, they're going to realize like this sigh of relief, like, oh my goodness, I probably got an hour to an hour and a half back to my day just from not having to do that. So I love the tips and tricks that moms share with each other. So thanks for that.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd like for you to think of yourself when you were very early postpartum. And if you could wrap your arms around your postpartum self, what is one thing that you would have liked to have someone whisper in your ear?
Honestly, for me, I think the thing that would have made the biggest difference is to have established a relationship with a lactation consultant before giving birth. So whether that be before, having like going through the classes that you were talking about or something, but have somebody who I knew that I would have then, especially like with Zach, I should have had you come to the hospital while I was still there to get started on the right foot. And yes, even though hospitals have lactation consultants, as we talked about, they're not always available right when you need them or available at all. So just kind of to take control of that and have a plan to have that kind of support in place right from, day one or day two. I think that, then Zach's tongue tie would have been diagnosed right up front, and it would have definitely been an easier process. So,
I wear my podcasting host hat sometimes, and then other times I'm wearing my lactation consult hat. And for me to have you say that is like music to my ears, because I think I really want parents to know that there's only so much preparation you can do, and there's only so much knowledge that you can take in, and you cannot breastfeed your baby before they're here. But you just said something crucial. One of the things that you can do is to make that connection, know who it is that you're going to call if you're having any problems. It just takes a little bit of time. It doesn't cost you anything to put that number somewhere that it's easily available so that you can reach out rather quickly, rather than some point 3:00 in the morning going on Google and trying to find someone and making a connection with someone that you never even had a conversation or met with. So I love, love, love that piece of advice, Becky. Thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with my audience that I have not asked you before we say goodbye?
Well, I'll just mention one other tip that I thought of as we were talking about pumping and bottles and all of that. because this is something else that, that can be important for mom. I got about a month into the pumping process and it was going well, and I was producing plenty of milk, and I had milk to freeze, and so that we got a stockpile going, which was great. And I was keeping track of every pumping. I had an app on my phone. Every single time I pumped the left breast and the right breast, and I recorded in there how much I was pumping. And then about a month into it, my pumping, the amounts that my body was producing kind of started to taper off. And within a few days, it was pretty significantly down. And I was like, what's going on? And why is my body all of a sudden not working? And I couldn't figure it out at first. And then I don't know what made me think of it, but something made me remember I had read on a forum someplace about those little white membranes. And when you get to the point of pumping, you'll know what I'm talking about. But these little white circular membranes that are part of the pump, somebody had mentioned on a forum that you have to replace those about once a month. And I thought, I haven't replaced those. So I got some more and I replaced them. And it was like, boom, I was right back up to my normal pumping amount. So then I just kind of made a plan that, the first of every month I replaced those so that I didn't have that issue. But I had a few days of kind of panic there where I thought, what's going on? Why is my body all of a sudden not producing as much as it did? Because I need it to produce more in order to keep up with what my daughter needs. If you run into situations like that, don't panic, reach out again to people for help, call a lactation consultant, look online, find information, because it can even be something as small as those little circular membrane that need to be changed out in order for you to continue with breastfeeding.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to expand on what you said. There may have been a little rip or something in your membranes, which would have caused it, because I certainly know moms who have literally used the same membranes for a whole year. But I'm glad that you brought that up, because when you go from clearly making several ounces more and start to see not this very gradual shift, but you see something significant, mothers tend to think there's something wrong with me. What do I need to do? And they start like external and buying herbs and other stuff to help boost their supply. And I like for them to like keep everything very close to hand at first and go through the process. And going through the pump parts, there might be a hole in the tubing. There might be a crack in the yellow valve there. There's various other things that could go on. And so taking a look at the parts first, because it might be something just as simple as one of the parts. So I'm glad you said that. And I also want to add to that those little white membranes are going to be, you should just buy a whole bunch. They're going to be the cheapest thing you will ever buy as a breastfeeding mother who's pumping. And so we talked about the setups and getting 4 setups. Those are more expensive. But these little membranes, you can get a package of the most cheapest thing you could ever buy. So when you become a pumping mom, you realize how important it is. It's like, what do all these other women know that I don't know and that I should know that'll make my life easier?
And there are forums out there and there is support out there. So I would definitely encourage moms to, reach out. There were times that I went online and posted questions, and other moms were happy to help me out. So there's definitely that community out there.
Becky, are you interested in giving an email address if anybody wanted to contact you to ask you something specific that you talked about during this interview?
Sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, so tell us what it is.
Sure. They can reach me at Becky, BECKY .Ramsdell, RAMSD as in David, ELL @gmail.com.
And to my audience, you'd probably want to put something in the subject line like guest on the All About Breastfeeding show, just so that you can recognize emails that you're not used to getting.
Yeah, definitely. That would be helpful. But I'm happy to, help support other moms and answer any questions that I might be able to answer, and just provide support and encouragement.
Thank you so much, Becky. We are recording this on a Saturday morning, and for a mom who's working outside the house and has a very busy lifestyle with a couple of kids, I extremely am so appreciative of you taking this time to hang out with me and share your story with my listeners. So I appreciate you very much.
Well, thank you. And thank you for letting me come on the show and hopefully encourage other moms. And my experiences with you made such a difference in, my relationships with my kids and being able to experience nursing with them, which, for a long time was something that I wasn't sure that I would ever be able to do. So that is so special. And I always encourage other moms to reach out and get help. So thank you, Lori.
You are very welcome. You take care and have a wonderful day.
You too.